The great hall of the Galactic Survival Academy buzzed with nervous energy. Students from dozens of worlds sat in floating chairs arranged in perfect circles. Their skin colors ranged from deep blue to bright orange, and some had scales while others had fur. But in the third row, 4 humans sat together, looking small compared to their alien classmates. Professor Velthar walked to the center of the room. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 arms that moved like snakes. His yellow eyes looked at each student as he spoke. "Today we discuss the final exam," he said in his deep voice that echoed through the hall. Jiwan shifted in his seat. He was 28 years old, with short black hair and calloused hands from years of outdoor work. Next to him sat Nari, a woman with bright eyes who always carried a small notebook. Hyun sat behind them, quietly tapping his fingers on his leg as he thought. Sora completed their group, her attention focused completely on the professor. "Your final challenge will test everything you have learned," Velthar continued. "You must survive on a world that has defeated every species that tried to live there." He pressed a button, and a hologram appeared above their heads. It showed a planet, covered in endless sand dunes under twin suns. "This is Kepler 442c, the professor announced. "We call it the Killing Ground." The room fell silent. Even the usually chatty Zephyrian students stopped talking. Everyone knew stories about the Killing Ground. It was famous across the galaxy as the place where explorers went to die. 17 different species have tried to establish colonies there, Velthar explained. The Krathan Empire sent their best desert fighters. The Aquatic Federation brought water-making machines. The Tech Collective used their most advanced drilling equipment. He paused and looked around the room. They all failed. They all died. Student with blue skin raised her hand. "Professor, what makes it so dangerous?" "No water," Velthar replied simply. "The planet has 2 suns that burn all day. The temperature reaches 50 degrees during the day and drops to freezing at night. There is no rain, no lakes, no rivers, just sand and rocks and death." The hologram zoomed in to show the surface. Students could see the bones of huge machines scattered across the desert. These were the remains of previous attempts to conquer the planet. "The Hegemony Council has declared Kepler 442c impossible to survive," Velthar continued. "No carbon-based life form can live there for more than a few days. The lack of water makes it certain death." Jiwan raised his hand slowly. The professor's yellow eyes fixed on him with surprise. Humans rarely spoke up in class, especially not during important lectures like this one. "Yes, human?" Velthar asked. "Sir, has anyone ever actually looked for water there?" "I mean really looked?" Jiwan asked in his quiet voice. The room erupted in laughter. A large reptilian student behind him made a hissing sound that meant amusement in his language. Even some of the teaching assistants smiled. Professor Velthar held up one of his 4 hands for silence. "Young human, the greatest minds in the galaxy have studied that planet. They have used deep space scanners, molecular analyzers, and quantum detection equipment. If water existed there, we would have found it. But sir," Jiwan continued, "maybe they were looking in the wrong way." The laughter grew louder. Velthar's expression changed from amusement to annoyance. "Are you suggesting that human primitive methods could succeed where advanced galactic technology has failed?" Nari put her hand on Jiwan's arm, trying to stop him from speaking. But Jiwan had grown up learning old ways from his grandfather. He believed in things that modern people laughed at. I'm just saying that sometimes old ways work when new ways don't, Jiwan replied. Professor Velthar's 4 arms crossed over his chest. His yellow eyes grew bright with what looked like anger. Very well, human. Since you seem so confident, your team will take the Kepler 442c challenge. The room fell completely silent. Even the air recyclers seemed to stop humming. Taking the Killing Ground challenge was basically choosing to die. Nari spoke up quickly. Professor, surely there are other options for our final exam? No. Velthar said firmly, your teammate has volunteered you for the ultimate test. You will have 1 week to survive on Kepler 442c. If you succeed, you will graduate with the highest honors. If you fail... He didn't need to finish the sentence. Hyun leaned forward. What supplies do we get? Basic survival gear, water for 3 days, food for 1 week, standard environmental suits, and whatever primitive tools you think will help you. Velthar added the last part with clear mockery in his voice. Sora had been quiet until now. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. The transport ship will take you to the planet. I will observe from orbit to document your attempt. Professor Velthar seemed to enjoy the word attempt, as if their failure was already certain. After class. The 4 humans walked together down the hallway. Other students pointed at them and whispered. Word was already spreading that the humans had volunteered for the Death Planet Challenge. G1, what were you thinking? Nari asked once. They were alone. I was thinking about my grandfather, G1 replied. He could find water anywhere. He taught me his methods before he died. They're old methods, but they work. Hyun shook his head. Old methods against a planet that killed 17 species? This isn't Earth, G1. This is alien soil under alien suns. Water is water, G1 said simply, and people are people no matter what planet they come from. My grandfather always said that if you know how to listen, the Earth will tell you where to find what you need. Sora had been thinking quietly. Now she spoke. What kind of methods did your grandfather teach you? Jiwon smiled for the first time since class. You'll see. But first I need to get something from my room, something the professor will think is just a primitive tool. That night, news of the human challenge spread through the academy. Students gathered in groups to talk about it. Most thought the humans were crazy or stupid. Some felt sorry for them. A few admired their courage, even if they thought it was foolish courage. In the teacher's lounge, Professor Velthar talked with his colleagues. Finally, we'll have proof that human arrogance leads to human failure, he said. Perhaps after this, they'll be more humble in my classes. Assistant Professor Crix, his research assistant, nodded. Should we prepare the rescue ship? There won't be enough left to rescue, Velthar replied coldly. But yes, prepare it anyway. We'll need to collect the bodies for their families. Meanwhile, in the human dormitory, Jiwan packed his grandfather's most precious gift. It was a simple Y-shaped piece of wood worn smooth by many hands. To anyone else, it looked like nothing special. Just a stick. But Jiwan knew better. Are you really going to bet our lives on that piece of wood? Nari asked. I'm betting our lives on thousands of years of human wisdom, Jiwan replied. Sometimes the old ways are old because they work. The next morning would begin their journey to the killing ground. None of them slept well that night. The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder that ran through every wall and floor. Jiwan felt his stomach twist as he looked out the small window. Kepler 442c hung in space before them, like a brown and orange ball of death. "Doesn't look so bad from up here," Hyun said, but his voice shook a little. "Wait until we get closer," replied Captain Torex, the ship's pilot. He was a short alien with blue fur and 6 arms. "I've brought 17 different teams to this planet over the years. None of them came back." Nari checked her equipment one more time. She had packed everything carefully: water recycler, soil analyzer, emergency beacon, and basic tools. Next to her gear, Ji-Won's wooden stick looked very out of place. Still time. "To change your minds," Captain Torex offered. "I can take you back to the academy. Tell them you got sick or something." "No," Ji-Won said firmly. "We're going down." As they got closer to the planet, the true horror of Kepler 442c became clear. 2 suns burned in the sky, one orange and one red. The surface was nothing but sand dunes that stretched to the horizon. No plants, no rivers, no signs of life anywhere. The remains of crashed ships and broken machines dotted the landscape like metal bones. "Landing in 30 minutes, Captain Torex announced. "I'll drop you at the standard site, same place all the other teams started." Sora looked through her binoculars at the landing zone. She could see the rusted hulks of massive water drilling machines. The Aquatic Federation had brought equipment the size of buildings. It hadn't helped them. High above the planet, Professor Velthar's observation ship waited in orbit. He sat in his comfortable chair, watching screens that showed the human team preparing to land. Around him, his assistants set up cameras and recording equipment. "How long do you think they'll last?" asked Crix, adjusting a sensor array. 3 days, Velthar replied without hesitation. "That's how long their water will keep them alive. The heat and cold will weaken them quickly." "What about the primitive tool the human brought?" another assistant asked. Professor Velthar laughed, a sound like wind through metal pipes. "A piece of wood? Please. If wooden sticks could find water, don't you think someone would have tried it before now?" The transport ship landed with a loud thump, sending up clouds of orange dust. Captain Torex opened the cargo doors, and immediately the heat hit them like a physical blow. Even with their environmental suits, the humans could feel the burning air trying to cook them alive. "Temperature is 47 degrees, Nari read from her suit's display. "And it's still early morning." They unloaded their supplies quickly. 3 days of water, 1 week of food, basic shelter equipment, and their various tools and instruments. Everything they needed to survive fit in 4 backpacks. "Good luck," Captain Torex called as he prepared to leave. "I'll monitor your emergency beacons. If you activate one, I'll come get whatever's left of you." The ship lifted off, leaving the 4 humans alone on the most dangerous planet in known space. The silence that followed was complete and terrible. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the sound of their own breathing inside their helmets. "Well," Hyun said finally, "here we are." They walked away from the landing site toward a small ridge that might provide some shade. All around them, the evidence of previous failures was scattered across the sand. Here, a broken drilling bit the size of a car. There, the remains of an atmospheric processor that had melted in the heat. "Look at this," Sora called. She stood next to a piece of machinery covered in strange writing. "This is from the Krathan Empire. They're supposed to be the best desert fighters in the galaxy." "Didn't help them much," Ji-Won observed. They found a place between 2 large rocks that offered a little shade and set up their basic camp. One small shelter, just big enough for all 4 of them. As they worked, the temperature continued to rise. 50 degrees now," Nari announced. This is insane. Ji-won pulled his grandfather's dowsing rod from his pack. In the harsh light of the twin suns, it looked even more primitive than before. Just a Y-shaped piece of wood with smooth, worn handles up. In orbit, Professor Velthar watched through his cameras and shook his head. There it is, the great human secret weapon, a stick. Sir, Crick said hesitantly, what if they actually find water? Impossible, Velthar replied. The planet has been surveyed by the best scientific minds in 17 civilizations. Deep core samples, satellite scans, geological surveys. There is no water on that planet. But what if there is, and the surveys missed it? Professor Velthar turned all 4 of his yellow eyes on his assistant. Crix, that piece of wood has no sensors, no computer chips, no quantum detection capabilities. It's just dead plant matter. How could it possibly find something that our most advanced technology cannot? Down on the surface, Ji-won walked away from the camp with his dowsing rod held loosely in his hands. The others followed, curious despite their doubts. So how does this work exactly? Hyun asked. You hold it like this, Ji-won demonstrated, gripping the 2 shorter arms of the Y while the longer arm pointed forward. Then you walk slowly and pay attention. When there's water underground, the rod will move. Move how? Sora wanted to know. Pulls down toward the ground. My grandfather said it's because water calls to water, and our bodies are mostly water too. Nari wiped sweat from her forehead. Even with the suit's cooling system, the heat was brutal. Ji-won, I know you believe in this, but we need to be practical. We only have 3 days of water. That's why we need to find more, Ji-won replied calmly. He began walking across the sand, rod held steady in his hands. The others followed, watching carefully for any sign of movement from the wooden tool. Behind them, their footprints were the only marks of life in the endless desert. After an hour of walking, nothing had happened. The rod remained perfectly still. The heat was getting worse, and they were all sweating heavily inside their suits. Maybe we should go back to camp, Hyun suggested. Rest during the day and try again when it's cooler. Good idea, Nari agreed. We need to conserve our energy and water. As they walked back, Ji-won continued to hold the dowsing rod. He had promised his grandfather he would always trust the old ways, even when others doubted them, especially when others doubted them. In orbit, Professor Velthar made notes in his research journal. Day 1. Humans attempt primitive water detection method. No results. Behavior suggests early stages of heat-related mental impairment. That evening, as the twin suns set and the temperature dropped toward freezing, the 4 humans sat in their tiny shelter and shared their first meal on the killing ground. Tomorrow will be more systematic, Nari said. Map out a search pattern, take soil samples, look for any geological signs of water. And I'll keep using the rod, Ji-won added. Ji-won, Sora said gently. What if it doesn't work? What if there really is no water here? Ji-won looked at his grandfather's dowsing rod, now leaning against the shelter wall. In the artificial light, it looked like what it was, a simple piece of wood. Then we die, he said simply. But at least we'll die trying something that worked for thousands of years on Earth. Outside, the temperature continued to drop, and the first of many long cold nights on the killing ground began. The second day on Kepler 442c began before the twin suns rose. Ji-won woke to the sound of chattering teeth. During the night, the temperature had dropped to -15 degrees. Ice had formed on the inside of their shelter. "This place is trying to kill us in every way possible," Hyun muttered as he checked his equipment. The extreme cold had drained power from several devices. Nari was already working, studying geological charts on her portable computer. According to the surveys, this whole area should be completely dry. But look at these rock formations. She pointed to her screen. On Earth, rocks like these often form near ancient water sources. Ancient being the important word, Sora added. Even if water was here millions of years ago, that doesn't help us now. As the suns rose, the temperature began to climb rapidly. Within 2 hours, they were back to dealing with deadly heat instead of deadly cold. Ji-won picked up his grandfather's dowsing rod and stepped outside. The wooden tool felt warm in his hands, heated by the intense sunlight, ready for another day. "Of stick waving?" Hyun asked. He didn't mean to be cruel, but the stress was getting to all of them. "Ready," Ji-won replied without anger. High in orbit, Professor Velthar was hosting a viewing party. Word had spread through the galactic academic community about the humans trying to find water with primitive magic. Scientists from across the galaxy had connected to watch what they expected to be an embarrassing failure. "Look at them!" laughed Professor Zentar from the Rigel Science Institute. "Still playing with that wooden toy." "It's almost sad," added Dr. Kellius from the Crystal Worlds. "Don't they understand that we've already proven there's no water on that planet?" Professor Velthar adjusted the camera to get a better view of Ji-won with the dowsing rod. This is what happens when primitive species refuse to accept scientific fact. They cling to their ancient superstitions even when faced with certain death. On the surface, the human team had developed a system. Nari and Hyun mapped the area and took geological readings. Sora collected samples of everything she could find: rocks, sand, even traces of ancient plant matter. And Ji-won walked with his dowsing rod, covering every square meter of ground they could manage in the growing heat. "Water levels holding steady," Nari announced after checking their supplies. "But we're using it faster than planned because of the extreme temperature swings." "How much time do we have?" Sora asked. "If we're careful, maybe 4 more days. Maybe 3. Ji-won paused in his searching to wipe sweat from his face. The dowsing rod had remained perfectly still for hours. Not even the slightest movement. "Ji-won," Hyun called. "I'm reading some interesting mineral deposits over here. Could be signs of old water flow." They gathered around Hyun's equipment. His geological scanner showed traces of minerals that formed when water evaporated. "This is promising," Sora agreed, studying the readings. "These minerals don't form without significant water presence." Nari cross-referenced the location with her maps. "We're about 3 kilometers from where the last expedition made camp. Maybe they didn't search this area thoroughly. Or maybe they searched it and found nothing, just like we are," Hyun said, frustration creeping into his voice. Ji-won walked to the spot where the mineral readings were strongest. He held the dowsing rod loosely, the way his grandfather had taught him. "Grandpa always said you can't force it," he said quietly. "You have to let the rod do what it wants to do." "And what does it want to do?" Sora asked. "Find water." The cameras in orbit captured everything. Hundreds of alien scientists watched as Ji-won walked slowly across the sand, holding his primitive wooden tool. "This is painful to watch," Dr. Kellius commented. "How can they still believe in such nonsense?" "Humans are young species," Professor Velthar explained. "They haven't learned to separate fact from folklore yet. Give them a few thousand more years of evolution." But not everyone watching was laughing. In a quiet corner of the viewing area, Professor Ylandra from the Ancient Studies Department watched with different eyes. She had spent her career studying the old ways of various species, including humans. She knew that sometimes ancient knowledge contained truths that modern science missed. "Velthar," she said quietly, "what if they actually find something?" "Impossible," Velthar replied confidently. "We've scanned every inch of that planet, from orbit, with instruments designed to detect what we expect to find. What if water exists there in a way our scans couldn't detect?" Professor Velthar's forearms gestured dismissively. "Water is water, Ylandra. H2O is H2O. Our instruments can detect a single molecule from space." On the surface, Jiwan continued his patient search. Hour after hour, he walked across the burning sand. The dowsing rod stayed motionless in his hands. "Maybe we should try a different area," Nari suggested as the afternoon heat reached its peak. "Just a little longer," Jiwan replied. He was thinking about his grandfather's words. "The Earth keeps its secrets until it's ready to share them. Be patient." They moved to a new area where Sora had found some interesting rock formations. The stones were layered in a way that suggested water had flowed through them long ago. "These formations are definitely sedimentary," Hyun confirmed. "Laid down by flowing water over thousands of years." "But when was that water here?" Nari asked. "1 million years ago. 10 million. Sora was examining some of the rock layers more closely. "Actually, some of these look more recent, maybe only a few thousand years old." This was encouraging news. If water had been in the area relatively recently, it might still be underground. Somewhere, Jiwan walked among the rock formations, dowsing rod held ready. The wooden tool remained still as he moved from place to place. Then, as he passed near a cluster of larger rocks, something changed. It was very slight, almost too small to notice. But Jiwon had been trained from childhood to pay attention to these tiny signals. The dowsing rod trembled. Just for a moment, just barely, but it moved. "Did you see that?" he called to the others. "See, what?" Hyun asked. The rod moved, just a little bit. The three scientists hurried over. They watched as Jiwon held the dowsing rod near the rocks again. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the rod gave another small tremor. "I don't see anything," Nari said honestly. "You have to watch the tip very carefully," Jiwon explained. "It's not dramatic. Just a small pull downward." In orbit, the viewing audience was getting bored. Hours of watching a human walk around with a stick had lost its entertainment value. "When do they usually give up?" Professor Zentar asked. "Most teams activate their emergency beacons by day 3, Velthar replied. "The humans might last until day 4 because they're too stubborn to admit failure." "Or too stupid," Dr. Kellius added. But Professor Ylandra was still watching intently. She had seen something in Jiwan's body language, a change in the way he held himself near those rocks. On the surface, the human team was having a debate. "Even if the rod is moving, it's barely noticeable," Hyun pointed out. "How can we be sure it's really detecting water and not just random vibrations?" "We can't be sure," Jiwan admitted. "But this is the first movement we've seen in 2 days. My grandfather always said to trust the small signs. Your grandfather also never had to find water on an alien planet with 2 suns," Nari said gently. "Water is water," Jiwan replied, echoing his grandfather's words. "It doesn't matter what planet it's on." Sora was taking readings around the rock formation. I am getting slightly higher moisture levels in the air here. Very slight, but measurable. That could just be evaporation from our own water supplies, Hyun pointed out. Maybe, but maybe not. As the second day ended and the temperature began to drop again, they returned to their shelter. They had enough water for maybe 3 more days. Tomorrow would be crucial. If we don't find water tomorrow, we need to activate the emergency beacon, Nari said as they shared their evening meal. 1 more day with the rod, Jiwon requested. Let me try the area around those rocks more thoroughly. 1 more day, the others agreed. That night, as they tried to sleep in the freezing cold, Jiwon held his grandfather's dowsing rod close to his chest. The wooden tool was the only thing connecting him to home, to the old ways, to thousands of years of human wisdom. Tomorrow, it would either save their lives or prove the alien professors right. By the 3rd morning on Kepler 442c, news of the human expedition had spread far beyond the Galactic Survival Academy. Students across dozens of worlds were following the story through their communication networks. Most watched for the same reason. People slowed down to look at accidents. They expected to see something terrible happen. In the Academy cafeteria, alien students gathered around viewing screens to watch the latest updates. "Are they still walking around with that stick?" asked a student from the crystalline worlds, her glass-like features sparkling with amusement. "Look at this," laughed another student, a large reptilian from the Keth system. He showed his friends a recording from the previous day of Jiwon carefully, examining his dowsing rod. "He's talking to a piece of wood." "My professor says this proves humans aren't ready for advanced civilization," added a third student. "They still believe in magic." The entertainment spread beyond just students. Faculty members began organizing viewing parties during their breaks. Some were taking bets on exactly when the humans would give up and activate their emergency beacon. Give them until noon today," Professor Drix from the engineering department announced to his colleagues. "The heat will break them." "No, they'll last until tonight," argued Professor Kane from xenobiology. "Humans are stubborn, but they're not completely stupid. When their water runs low, they'll call for rescue." Only Professor Yelandra from Ancient Studies remained quiet during these discussions. She had spent the night researching human folklore and traditional practices. What she found troubled her. On the planet's surface, the human team woke to another day of extreme cold, followed by rapidly rising heat. Their water supplies were now critically low. 2 days left, maybe less, Nari announced after checking their reserves. "We need to make a decision soon." Jiwon was already outside with his dowsing rod, walking among the rock formations where he had felt the small movements the day before. The wooden tool remained frustratingly still in his hands. "Anything?" Sora called. "Not yet," Jiwon replied, but he didn't stop searching. High in orbit, Professor Velthar was enjoying his moment of fame. His live broadcast of the human failure had attracted viewers from across the galaxy. Scientific institutions, military academies, and even entertainment networks were carrying his signal. "As you can see," he narrated for his audience, "the human subject continues his futile ritual with the primitive wooden implement. Note how he appears to be concentrating intensely, as if the stick might actually provide useful information." The comments flowing in from viewers were mostly mocking. "Do humans really think magic is real? Someone should tell them this isn't a fairy tale. How did such a primitive species even reach the stars? Maybe we should send them back to their caves." But mixed in with the mockery were a few different voices. What if they know something we don't? Ancient methods sometimes work for reasons we don't understand. My great-grandfather used similar techniques to find minerals on our homeworld. These comments were quickly buried under waves of laughter and ridicule. On the surface, Hyun was growing increasingly frustrated. Jiwon, we're running out of time. Maybe we should try a different approach. Like what? Jiwon asked, still walking slowly with the rod. I don't know. Dig randomly? Follow the mineral traces more systematically? Anything besides hoping that piece of wood will magically point to water. The word magically hit harder than Hyun had intended. Jiwon stopped walking and looked at his friend. You think I'm crazy too, Jiwon said quietly. I think you're brave, Hyun replied. But I also think we're going to die out here if we don't find water today. Sora was taking atmospheric readings near the rocks. I'm still getting slightly elevated. Moisture levels here. It's not much, but it's consistent. Consistent enough to dig? Nari asked. I don't know. The readings are so small they could be measurement error. In orbit, Professor Velthar highlighted this conversation for his viewers. Notice how the humans are now grasping at any tiny variation in their instrument readings. This is typical behavior of species facing extinction. They see patterns where none exist. The viewing audience was eating this up. Educational institutions across the galaxy were using the broadcast as a teaching example of how primitive thinking leads to failure. Dr. Yexara from the Galactic Science Council sent a message that appeared on Velthar's screen. This is an excellent demonstration of why we don't allow pre-scientific species into advanced programs. The humans clearly lack the mental development for logical thinking. But Professor Yelandra had been doing research all night. She sent a private message to Velthar. I've been studying human dowsing traditions. The practice has existed for over 4,000 years on their planet. It's been used successfully to locate water, minerals, and even archaeological sites. Velthar dismissed the message without reading it completely. He was too busy enjoying his moment as the galaxy's most popular broadcaster. On the surface, the temperature was rising toward its daily peak of 50 degrees. The humans had been searching for 3 hours without success. I think we need to face reality, Nari said gently. The rod isn't working. Maybe it worked on Earth. But this isn't Earth. Jiwon felt the weight of his friend's doubt. Even worse, he was starting to doubt himself. His grandfather had always found water. The dowsing rod had never failed on their family farm. But maybe Hyun was right. Maybe this wasn't the same thing. 1 more hour, he requested. Give me 1 more hour, and if nothing happens, we'll dig where Sora's readings are strongest. 1 more hour, the others agreed, though their expressions showed they didn't expect anything to change. The orbital cameras captured Jiwon's face as he continued his search. To the viewing audience, he looked desperate. Some viewers began to feel sorry for him. It's almost sad, commented Professor Ziloth from the Academy of Advanced Sciences. He really believes that Stick will save them. Should we be laughing at this? Asked a young student from the Peaceful Worlds Alliance. They're going to die. They made their choice, replied her professor. No one forced them to reject science in favor of superstition. But as the morning wore on, something began to change in the way people watched. The humans' determination was impressive, even if their methods seemed foolish. They weren't giving up. They weren't panicking. They were working together, supporting each other even as death approached. Say what you want about their primitive methods, observed Captain Rextar from the military academy, but their teamwork is outstanding. No arguments, no blame, no fear-driven decisions. Team spirit won't find water on a desert planet, Professor A. Velthar replied dismissively. Back on the surface, Jiwon had returned to the area where the rod had shown its slight movement the day before. He walked more slowly now, paying attention to every tiny sensation. The dowsing rod trembled. This time, all four humans saw it clearly. The wooden tool dipped downward for just a moment before returning to its normal position. "That's not wind," Sora said. "There is no wind." "And it's not his hands shaking," Hyun added. "The movement was too precise." Nari was checking her instruments. "I'm not reading any electromagnetic fields that could cause that kind of motion." Jiwon moved a step to the left and held the rod again. Nothing. A step to the right, still nothing. But when he returned to the exact spot where it had moved, the rod trembled again. In orbit, the viewing audience fell silent. Even the mockers stopped commenting as they watched the rod's clear, unmistakable movement. "Equipment malfunction," Professor Velthar announced quickly. "Obviously, there's some mechanical problem with their recording devices." But Professor Yilandra was watching more carefully. She had seen something in the way Jiwon handled the dowsing rod, a technique that matched ancient descriptions in her research. The human team was now gathered around the spot where the rod had moved. "If there's water here, how deep would it be?" Nari asked. "Could be anywhere from a few feet to 100 feet down," Jiwon replied. "My grandfather found water at all different depths." "We only have basic digging tools," Hyun pointed out. "If it's more than 10 or 15 feet down, we'll never reach it." "Then we better hope it's not that deep," Jiwon said, and picked up their small shovel. The mockery from orbit resumed as the cameras showed Jiwon beginning to dig in the hard, sun-baked ground. "Now they're digging randomly," Professor Velthar narrated. "This is the final stage before complete psychological breakdown." But the humans weren't breaking down. They were working together, taking turns with the shovel, supporting each other as their last hope lay in a hole they were digging in the ground based on the movement of a wooden stick. The galaxy watched, and for the first time, some viewers began to wonder if they were witnessing courage rather than foolishness. The fourth day on Kepler 4042c dawned with a crisis. During the night, their water recycler had malfunctioned. Instead of 3 days of water remaining, they now had less than 2 days. The heat and cold cycles must have damaged the internal components, Nari said, studying the broken device. "I can't fix it." Sora checked their remaining supplies. "If we ration carefully, we might last until tomorrow night." "Maybe." "Then we dig today, or we die," Hyun said simply. They had spent the previous afternoon clearing the surface where Jiwon's dowsing rod had shown movement. The ground was harder than concrete, baked solid by years under the twin suns. Progress was painfully slow. 2 feet down so far, Jiwon announced, wiping sweat from his face. Even with their environmental suits, the physical labor in 50-degree heat was exhausting. "Let me take a turn," Sora offered, reaching for the shovel. In orbit, the viewing audience had grown overnight. News networks across the galaxy were now carrying the story. The humans digging for water with primitive tools had become the most watched event in recent galactic history. Professor Velthar found himself hosting scientists, military officers, government officials, and even entertainment personalities. His small observation ship had become the center of galactic attention. "The human psychology is fascinating to observe," he explained to his expanded audience. "Notice how they continue their futile activity even when facing certain death. This demonstrates the danger of allowing primitive beliefs to override logical thinking." Dr. Kessa Anda from the Galactic Medical Institute nodded in agreement. "Classic Delusional behavior. They've convinced themselves the wooden stick is providing real information, but not everyone was convinced. Professor Yilandra had been joined by several other experts in ancient studies and traditional knowledge systems. "Velthar," she said during a break in the broadcast, "I've been researching further. Dowsing isn't just human folklore. Similar practices exist in the ancient histories of at least 12 different species." "Ancient being the key word," Velthar replied. "Primitive species often develop similar superstitions before they discover real science. But what if it's not superstition? What if there's an actual phenomenon that our modern instruments don't detect?" Velthar's forearms waved dismissively. "Impossible. If water existed where they're digging, our orbital scanners would have found it years ago. On the surface, the humans took turns digging. The hole was now 3 feet deep, and they still hadn't found anything but more hard-packed sand and rocks. My arms feel like they're going to fall off," Hyun gasped, handing the shovel to Nari. Jiwon stood at the edge of the hole, holding his dowsing rod. The wooden tool continued to show strong movement when held over the digging site. "It's getting stronger," he reported. "The pull is definitely getting stronger as we go deeper." "What does that mean exactly?" Sora asked. "According to my grandfather, the stronger the pull, the closer you are to water," Jiwon explained. "But it could also mean there's more water, or the water is flowing faster. Or it could mean nothing," Hyun added, but without his earlier harshness. The desperate situation was making them all more willing to hope. Nari had been digging for 20 minutes when her shovel hit something different. Instead of the ringing sound of metal on hard-packed sand, there was a duller thunk. "What was that?" Sora asked quickly. Nari scraped carefully with the shovel. "Rock, I think, but a different kind of rock." They all gathered around the hole. 4 feet down, Nari had uncovered what looked like a layer of different-colored stone. "That's sedimentary rock," Hyun said excitedly. "The kind that forms when water deposits minerals over time." "Recent water?" Nari asked hopefully. "Could be. Let me get my geological scanner." In orbit, the cameras captured the humans' excitement over finding a different type of rock. To most viewers, this seemed like desperate people grasping at any sign of hope. "They're celebrating finding a rock," Professor Velthar narrated with amusement. "This shows how dehydration affects cognitive function." But Professor Yilandra was watching more carefully. She noticed that Jiwon's dowsing rod was moving more dramatically now that they had reached the rock layer. "Velthar, look at the movement of their wooden implement. It's much more pronounced than before." "Random motion caused by the humans." "Exhaustion," Velthar replied quickly. Hyun's scanner was providing interesting readings. "This rock formation shows mineral deposits that typically form in the presence of moving water. And look at this. The mineral composition suggests the water was here relatively recently." "How recently?" Sora asked. "Maybe a few years ago, definitely not thousands of years." This news energized the team. If water had been in this exact spot just a few years ago, it might still be here, just deeper underground. "We keep digging," Jiwon said, taking the shovel from Nari. But the rock layer was even harder to dig through than the packed sand. Their progress slowed to inches per hour. "We're not going to make it," Nari said quietly. "At this rate, we'll run out of water before we get through this rock." "Then we dig faster," Jiwon replied, attacking the stone with renewed determination. The orbital audience watched as the humans pushed themselves beyond normal limits. They dug continuously now, passing the shovel between them every few minutes. No rest breaks, no conversation, just desperate digging. "This is painful to watch," commented Admiral Torex from the Fleet Command. "They're killing themselves." "Should we intervene?" asked Dr. Yiltara from the Medical Corps. "They haven't activated their emergency beacon," Professor Velthar pointed out. "Legally, we can't rescue them unless they request it." "And they won't request it," Professor Yilandra observed, "because they still believe they'll find water. 6 feet down, 7 feet, 8 feet. The hole was now so deep that they had to help each other climb in and out. The sides were starting to crumble, making the work dangerous as well as exhausting. "Soil's getting different down here," Sora called from the bottom of the hole. "It's not as hard-packed." "That's good, right?" Nari asked. "Could be. Softer soil might mean more moisture." Jiwon lowered his dowsing rod into the hole. Even from 8 feet down, the wooden tool showed strong movement. "It's definitely stronger." "Here," he reported, "much stronger than at the surface." In orbit, even some of the skeptics were beginning to pay closer attention. The humans had been digging for over 6 hours straight. Their determination was impressive, even if their methods seemed foolish. "I have to admit their endurance is remarkable," observed Professor Kexlar from the Physical Training Institute. "Most species would have collapsed hours ago." "Desperation can push any species beyond normal limits," Velthar replied. But Professor Yilandra was studying readouts from the observation ship's sensors. Something was bothering her about the mineral composition readings from the digging site. "Velthar, can you run a deep geological scan of the exact area where they're digging?" "We scanned that entire region 3 times during the original surveys," Velthar said impatiently. "Humor me. Run it again, but focus on the specific coordinates where they're working. 9 feet down. 10 feet. Hyun was at the bottom of the hole when his shovel broke through the rock layer into something softer underneath. "Got through!" he shouted. "There's different soil down here." The others crowded around the edge of the hole. 10 feet down, Hyun was digging in dark, soft earth that was completely different from anything they had found above. "It's damp," he called up to them. "The soil is actually damp." In orbit, Professor Velthar's sensor readings were coming back from the deep scan that Yilandra had requested. His expression changed as he studied the data. "That's impossible," he whispered. "What?" Yilandra asked. "The scan shows a geological formation that wasn't in our original surveys. How could we have missed this?" On the surface, 10 feet underground, Hyun's shovel struck something that made a hollow sound. He scraped the dirt away carefully and found smooth stone underneath. "There's something down here," he called. "Feels like a natural basin or something." Jawan's dowsing rod was now pulling so strongly toward the hole that he could barely hold. "It's steady. This is it," he said with growing excitement. "This is what the rod was pointing to." They helped Hyun climb out of the hole so Sora could go down with her scientific instruments. "Definite moisture readings down here," she reported. "And this rock formation, it looks like a natural water collection system." "You mean like an underground pool?" Nari asked hopefully. "Maybe. Let me clear more of this area." The galaxy watched as the humans reached the moment of truth. Either they would find water or they would die trying. In the hole, 10 feet below the surface of the most desolate planet in known space, Sora's instruments were detecting something that made her heart race. "Guys," she called up to the others, her voice shaking with emotion. "I think we found it." 10 feet below the surface of Kepler 442c, Sora scraped away the last of the dirt with trembling hands. Her instruments were going crazy with moisture readings, but she needed to see with her own eyes what lay beneath the ancient stone. "What do you see?" Jiwon called down from above. "Give me a minute," Sora replied, her voice tight with concentration. She used her hands to clear away centuries of accumulated sand and debris. The stone underneath was smooth, carved by flowing water over thousands of years. It formed a natural basin about 6 feet across, and in the center of that basin, reflecting the light from her helmet lamp, was water. "Oh my God," Sora whispered. "What? What is it?" Nari called urgently. Sora's voice broke as she shouted back, "Water! There's water! Down here! Clean, clear, beautiful water!" Above ground, the three others stared at each other in stunned silence. After 4 days of heat, cold, exhaustion, and growing despair, they had actually found what they were looking for. "How much?" Hyun asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sora was examining the natural basin with her scanner. "It's about 3 feet deep and maybe 6 feet across. There's got to be hundreds of gallons here." In orbit, the viewing audience fell completely silent. Across the galaxy, scientists, students, military officers, and government officials sat in shocked disbelief as the cameras showed Sora kneeling beside a pool of crystal-clear water 10 feet underground on the most desolate planet in known space. "Professor," Velthar stared at his screens with his mouth open. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Our scans showed no water, no underground reservoirs, no aquifers, nothing." Professor Yilandra leaned forward to study the images more carefully. "Velthar, where is that water coming from? Is it a spring?" Down, in the hole, Sora was testing the water with her equipment. "It's flowing!" she called up excitedly. "There's a natural spring feeding this basin. The water is coming from somewhere deeper underground." "Is it safe to drink?" Jiwon asked, testing now. Sora ran her scanner over the water sample. "pH level is perfect. No harmful bacteria. No toxic minerals. It's better quality than what we brought from the ship." Hyun was already lowering a container, down to Sora. "Fill this up. We need to taste it to believe it." Sora filled the container and handed it up. The 3 humans above ground gathered around as Hyun removed his helmet and took the first sip. His eyes closed as the cool, clean water touched his lips. After days of carefully rationed, recycled water that tasted like metal and chemicals, this natural spring water was like drinking liquid joy. "It's perfect," he said, tears running down his face. "It's absolutely perfect." One by one, they all tasted the water. Nari laughed and cried at the same time. Jiwon held his grandfather's dowsing rod and whispered thank you to the wooden tool that had led them to salvation. In orbit, chaos was erupting among the viewing audience. Comments were flooding in from across the galaxy. "How is this possible? The scans showed no water. Did they fake this somehow? The humans actually did it. That wooden stick really works." Professor Velthar was frantically running new scans of the area. "The deep geological readings are completely different from our original surveys," he announced to his stunned audience. "There's an entire underground water system that we missed." "How do you miss an underground water system?" demanded Dr. Kesanda from the Medical Institute. "I don't know," Velthar replied, his composure finally breaking. "Our scanners are the most advanced in the galaxy. They should have detected this easily." Professor Yilandra was studying the data more carefully. "Velthar, look at the depth and formation. This water source is in a natural rock basin about 10 feet underground, fed by a spring that comes from much deeper. Our orbital scans were calibrated to detect large underground reservoirs or surface water sources. So, So we were looking for lakes and rivers. We weren't looking for small, deep springs hidden in rock formations. Our technology was too sophisticated to detect something this simple. On the surface, the human team was celebrating their discovery. But they were also being practical. They needed to secure their water source and figure out how to extract enough to survive. "We need to widen the access to the spring," Nari said, "and set up a system to bring water to the surface. First, let's drink our fill," Hyun suggested. "I want to replace every drop of recycled water in my body with this beautiful natural spring water." They took turns going down into the hole to drink directly from the spring. The water was cold and sweet, a perfect temperature despite the extreme heat above ground. Ji-won knelt beside the natural basin and placed his hand on his grandfather's dowsing rod. "You were right, Grandpa," he said quietly. "Water calls to water, and the old ways still work." Above them, the observation ship's cameras captured everything. The images of humans drinking from a natural spring on the impossible-to-survive desert planet were being broadcast across the galaxy. Comments continued to flood in. "This changes everything we thought we knew. Maybe we should take another look at traditional methods." The humans found water where 17 other species failed. That wooden stick is more accurate than our quantum scanners. But not everyone was ready to accept what they were seeing. Dr. Rex Manu from the Technology Institute sent a message. "There has to be a scientific explanation. Primitive wooden tools cannot outperform advanced scanning technology." Professor Velthar was desperately trying to maintain his credibility. "Obviously, this is an unusual situation," he announced to his audience. "The humans were extremely lucky to stumble across a water source that our instruments couldn't detect." "Lucky?" Professor Yilandra challenged him. "They searched systematically for 3 days with that dowsing rod. They dug for hours in exactly the right spot. That's not luck, Velthar. That's skill." Down in the hole, Sora was making more discoveries. "The spring is stronger than I first thought," she called up. "The flow rate could easily support 4 people indefinitely, maybe more." "More people?" Nari asked. "This water source could supply a small research station, maybe even a permanent settlement." This news sent another shock through the orbital audience. Not only had the humans found water on the impossible planet, but they had found enough water to potentially establish the first successful colony on Kepler 442c. "We need to document everything," Hyun said. "Map the water system, test the flow, rates, analyze the source of the spring. And we need to contact the Academy," Nari added. "Let them know we've succeeded." But Ji-won was looking at his dowsing rod thoughtfully. "Before we do any of that, I want to check something." "What? If there's one spring here, there might be others. My grandfather always said water sources often come in groups." He walked away from the hole, holding the dowsing rod loosely in his hands. After about 50 meters, the wooden tool began to show movement again. "Another one!" he called back to his teammates. "There's another water source over here." In orbit, Professor Velthar watched in growing horror as Ji-won's dowsing rod indicated a second location. If there were multiple water sources on this supposedly waterless planet, it would completely overturn decades of scientific assumptions. "This is impossible," he muttered. 17 species searched this planet. Hundreds of scientists studied it. How could we all be so wrong? Professor Yilandra placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Maybe we weren't wrong, Velthar. Maybe we just weren't asking the right questions." On the surface of Kepler 442c, The four humans stood around their hole in the ground, looking at the clear, flowing water that would save their lives. They had succeeded where everyone else had failed, using nothing but ancient wisdom, simple tools, and the courage to keep trying when everyone else said it was impossible. The galaxy would never look at human, primitive methods the same way again. The news that humans had found water on Kepler 442c using a wooden stick spread across the galaxy faster than a supernova explosion. Within hours, every major scientific institution was demanding explanations. How had a primitive tool succeeded, where the most advanced technology in the galaxy had failed? Professor Velthar found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to explain the impossible to the most brilliant minds in known space. His observation ship was now surrounded by vessels from a dozen different governments and scientific organizations, all wanting to understand what had happened. On the planet's surface, the human team was preparing to share their discovery with the galaxy. But first, they wanted to understand it themselves. Before we talk to anyone else, we need to figure out exactly how this worked, Nari said, setting up her recording equipment. If we're going to change how people think about traditional methods, we need to provide scientific explanations. Jiwan sat cross-legged beside their water source, holding his grandfather's dowsing rod. I'll try to explain what I felt, what the rod was telling me. And we'll provide the scientific measurements to back it up, Hyun added, arranging his geological equipment. This is important, Sora said seriously. What we say here could change how the entire galaxy approaches problem-solving. They began their analysis by examining the dowsing rod itself. Under Sora's microscope, the wooden tool revealed interesting properties. The wood is from an earth tree called a hazel, she reported. It's about 50 years old based on the growth patterns. The moisture content is perfectly balanced. Not too dry, not too damp. Why does that matter? Hyun asked. Wood is slightly conductive when it has the right moisture content. It can respond to very small electrical fields. Nari was taking electromagnetic readings around the water source. There's definitely an electrical field here, very weak but measurable. The flowing water underground creates a small electrical current. So the dowsing rod was actually detecting electricity? Hyun asked. Partly, Jiwon replied. But it's more complicated than that. My grandfather taught me that the rod responds to many things: electrical fields, magnetic variations, even changes in gravity. Gravity? Nari looked surprised. Underground. Water has different density than rock or sand. It creates tiny variations in gravitational pull, so small that our instruments can't measure them, but sensitive enough for the human body to detect. Professor Yilandra, monitoring from orbit, leaned forward with interest. This was exactly what she had hoped to hear, a scientific explanation. For traditional knowledge, Sora was studying the water flow patterns. The spring comes from a very deep source, probably connected to an underground river system. The water flows through natural rock channels that bring it close to the surface at certain points, which explains why our orbital scans missed it, Hyun realized. We were looking for large underground lakes or surface water. We weren't scanning for small channels of flowing water 10 feet underground. Exactly. Our technology was designed to find what we expected to find. When the reality was different from our expectations, we missed it completely. In orbit, Professor Velthar was listening to every word through the communication link. His scientific pride was battling with the growing evidence that human traditional methods had somehow succeeded where galactic science had failed. But how does the human body detect these tiny variations? He asked through the comm system. Jiwan looked up at the cameras that were broadcasting his words across the galaxy. My grandfather explained it this way. Humans evolved on a planet where finding water meant survival. Over millions of years, our bodies developed sensitivity to the signs of water, electrical fields, magnetic variations, even subtle changes in air pressure and humidity. You're saying evolution gave humans water-finding abilities? Dr. Kessa Anda from the Medical Institute asked over the comm. Not exactly. We all have the ability. But most modern humans ignore these subtle senses because they rely on technology. Instead, my grandfather taught me to pay attention to what my body was telling me. Nari had been running calculations on her computer. The electrical fields around this water source are incredibly weak. Less than 1% of what our standard instruments can detect. But if the human nervous system is sensitive enough, it is, Sora confirmed. Human nerve cells can detect electrical fields much weaker than our electronic instruments. We just don't usually pay attention to those signals. So the dowsing rod acts like an amplifier? Hyun asked. Sort of, Jiwon replied. The rod moves when my hands detect tiny changes in electrical or magnetic fields. The movement makes the signals visible instead of just felt. Professor Yilandra was taking detailed notes. This explanation made perfect sense from an evolutionary biology perspective. What about the other factors? She asked over the comm. You mentioned gravitational variations. Flowing water underground creates very small changes in local gravity. Jiwon explained. Again, too small for instruments to measure, but detectable by human senses if you know how to pay attention. And your grandfather taught you how to pay attention? He taught me to quiet my mind, feel what my body was telling me, and trust those feelings even when they didn't make logical sense. In the observation ship, Professor Velthar was struggling with cognitive dissonance. Everything the humans were saying made scientific sense, but it challenged everything he believed about the superiority of advanced technology. Even if all of this is true, he said over the comm, it's still just one lucky success. The dowsing method wouldn't work reliably. Actually, Nari interrupted, we tested that yesterday. Jaiwon used the dowsing rod to locate 3 more water sources within a kilometer of our main spring. We've confirmed all 3 with our instruments. This statement sent shockwaves through the orbital audience. Not one lucky find, but 4 separate water sources discovered using the same wooden stick. 4 sources? Professor Velthar's voice cracked slightly. 4 that we've confirmed so far, Hyun added. Jiwon thinks there might be more. This area seems to be rich with underground springs. Dr. Rex Manu from the Technology Institute sent an urgent message. If there are multiple water sources, we need to completely resurvey this planet. Our original assessment was clearly wrong. That's exactly what we're saying, Sora replied. Your technology is excellent for finding what you expect to find, but sometimes you need different approaches to discover the unexpected. Jiwon held up his dowsing rod for the cameras. This piece of wood doesn't have quantum sensors or molecular analyzers. It can't scan from orbit or process millions of data points. But it can detect things your advanced instruments miss. Like what? Asked Professor Ziloth from the Academy of Advanced Sciences. Like the fact that water often follows patterns that don't show up in geological surveys. Like the way underground springs connect to each other in networks. Like the subtle signs that life leaves behind, even on planets that seem completely dead. Nari was reviewing their data from the past 4 days. Looking back at our search pattern, the dowsing rod was giving us information from the very first day. We just didn't recognize it at first. What do you mean? Hyun asked. Remember the slight movements you felt near the rock formations? Those were real signals. The rod was detecting the underground water network, but it was too weak to be obvious until we got closer to the main source. So the method works, but it requires patience and skill to interpret the results, Professor Yilandra observed. Exactly, Jiwan agreed. It's not magic. It's applied science that most people don't understand anymore. The implications were staggering. If traditional methods could find resources that modern technology missed, entire worlds might need to be reevaluated. Planets dismissed as uninhabitable might actually support life. We need to change how we approach exploration, Admiral Torex from Fleet Command said over the comm. Include traditional knowledge specialists on survey teams. We need to study these methods scientifically, Dr. Yiltara from the Medical Corps added. Understand the biological mechanisms that make them work. Most importantly, Professor Yilandra concluded, we need to stop assuming that newer is always better. Sometimes ancient wisdom contains truths that modern science has forgotten. On the surface of Kepler 442c, beside their life-saving spring, of clear, cool water, the four humans looked up at the cameras that connected them to the entire galaxy. The old ways and the new ways don't have to compete, Jiwan said finally. They can work together. My grandfather's dowsing rod found the water, but your instruments confirmed it was safe to drink. Traditional knowledge and modern science make a good team. As the twin suns set on their fourth day on the supposedly impossible planet, the humans prepared to rest beside their flowing spring. They had not only survived the ultimate test, they had changed how an entire galaxy thought about the relationship. Between ancient wisdom and modern technology, the age of dismissing traditional methods as primitive superstition was over. 6 months after the humans found water on Kepler 442c, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a simple final exam had become a revolution in how advanced civilizations approached problem-solving. Jiwan stood on the observation deck of the new research station that now occupied the site of their original camp. Below him, the desert that had once been called the Killing Ground was bustling with activity. Scientists from dozens of worlds worked alongside traditional knowledge keepers, combining ancient wisdom with modern technology. The third well is producing better than we expected, Nari reported, joining him at the window. She now served as the station's chief engineer, overseeing the sustainable water extraction systems they had developed. Any word from the survey teams? Jiwan asked. Hyun's team found 2 more underground river systems in the northern sector. Sora's biological survey discovered 17 different species of microorganisms that we never knew existed on this planet. Jiwan smiled. The planet they had been told was completely lifeless was actually teeming with simple forms of life, all connected to the underground water network that previous surveys had missed. The research station itself had become a symbol of cooperation between traditional and modern approaches. Solar collectors and wind generators provided power, but their placement had been determined by traditional wind reading methods that were more accurate than computer models. Water pumps used advanced technology, but the wells had been located, using dowsing rods and other traditional techniques. Jiwan, Nari said, there's a communication for you from the Galactic Academy. He accepted the call on his portable device. Professor Velthar appeared on the screen, but he looked very different from the arrogant academic who had assigned them to the Death Planet 6 months ago. Jiwan, Velthar said, I wanted to give you a personal update on the new curriculum. Changes. The Galactic Survival Academy had completely restructured their programs after the Kepler 442c discovery. Traditional knowledge was now taught alongside advanced technology. Students learn to use dowsing rods, weather reading, animal behavior interpretation, and dozens of other ancient techniques. "How are the students responding?" Jiwan asked. "Better than we expected." The Crystalline Worlds delegation was skeptical at first, but after their students successfully located mineral deposits using traditional methods, they became our strongest supporters. Professor Yilandra appeared in the background of the transmission. She had been promoted to head the new Department of Traditional Knowledge Integration. "Jiwan," she called, "the Hegemony Council wants to discuss establishing more research stations like yours. Planets that were dismissed as uninhabitable are being resurveyed using combined traditional and modern methods." This was the news Jiwan had been hoping for. If their success could help make other worlds livable, all their suffering on Kepler 442c would have been worthwhile. "We're ready to help," he replied. "My grandfather's techniques aren't limited to finding water. Traditional methods can locate minerals, predict weather patterns, even identify the best locations for agriculture." "Speaking of your grandfather," Velthar said, his voice softening, "I owe him an apology, and I owe you one as well. I was wrong to dismiss human traditional knowledge as primitive superstition." "You weren't completely wrong," Jiwan replied generously. "Traditional methods don't always work, and they're not always right. But the same is true for modern technology. The best results come from using both together." After the call ended, Nari and Jiwan walked through the research station. In one laboratory, alien scientists were learning to use traditional water-finding methods from human instructors. In another, human researchers were studying alien techniques for reading electromagnetic patterns. "Look at that," Nari said, pointing to a mixed group of students practicing with dowsing rods under the guidance of Professor Crix, Velthar's former assistant, who was now one of the station's most enthusiastic traditional knowledge advocates. The students represented 8 different species, all learning to quiet their minds and pay attention to the subtle signals their bodies could detect. Some were more naturally gifted than others, but all were making progress. "Your grandfather would be proud," Nari observed. "I think he would," Jiwan agreed, touching the original dowsing rod that now hung on the wall of the station's main hall. Next to it was a plaque that read, "Water calls to water, and wisdom calls to wisdom, regardless of which world it comes from." A year later, Jiwan found himself addressing the Galactic Congress, the highest governing body in known space. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had gathered to hear about the implications of the Kepler 442c discovery. "The lesson isn't that traditional methods are better than modern technology," he told the assembled delegates. "The lesson is that different approaches can find different solutions. By combining the wisdom of the past with the tools of the present, we can solve problems that neither could handle alone." In the audience, he could see species that had been enemies for centuries, sitting side by side, united by their shared interest in these new collaborative methods. "The water we found on Kepler 442c was always there," Jiwan continued. "But it took a combination of ancient human knowledge and modern scientific instruments to locate, extract, and analyze it safely. Today, 17 planets that were previously considered uninhabitable now host thriving colonies. Mining operations on 12 worlds have increased their output by over 300% using traditional mineral-finding techniques. Weather prediction accuracy has improved across 47 systems by incorporating ancient atmospheric reading methods. The statistics were impressive, but Jiwan knew the real victory was deeper than numbers. More importantly, we've learned that wisdom doesn't become worthless just because it's old, and technology doesn't become wrong just because it's new. Every species in this chamber has traditional knowledge that could benefit everyone else. Every civilization has developed methods that work in ways we don't always understand. After his speech, delegates from across the galaxy approached him. With their own stories of traditional methods they had dismissed or forgotten. "My people used to navigate by reading the behavior of stellar winds," said Ambassador Reltoth from the Void Walkers. "We abandoned those methods when we developed quantum navigation. But after hearing about your success, we tested the old ways again. They're more accurate for detecting navigation hazards than our computers. The singing crystals of our world were thought to be mere decoration," added Representative Zilhan from the Harmonic Worlds. "But recent tests show they can predict seismic activity days before our most sensitive instruments. Story after story, species after species. The galaxy was rediscovering thousands of years of accumulated wisdom that had been set aside in the rush toward technological advancement. 5 years after the discovery on Kepler 442c, G1 returned to the planet for the dedication of the permanent colony. The desert world that had killed explorers from 17 species now supported a thriving community of over 10,000 residents from dozens of worlds. Hyun, now the colony's chief geologist, met him at the spaceport. "Want to see something amazing?" he asked with a grin. They drove to the outskirts of the settlement, where a group of children from various species were playing near one of the spring-fed pools. The water was crystal clear, supporting small fish and aquatic plants that had been introduced to create a balanced ecosystem. The kids learned traditional water finding as part of their basic education, Hyun explained. "Watch this." A young crystalline girl, no more than 8 years old, was teaching a human boy how to hold a dowsing rod. Their different physiologies meant they had to adapt the technique, but both children were successfully locating small water sources around the pool. "They don't think it's strange or primitive," Hyun observed. "To them, it's just another useful skill, like using a computer or reading a map." "That's how it should be," Ji-won replied, watching the children learn from each other without prejudice or preconceptions. As the sun set on Kepler 442c, Ji-won walked to the memorial that had been erected at the site of their original dig. It honored not just the human team that had found water, but all the explorers who had died trying to survive on this world before the solution was discovered. "They weren't failures," read the inscription. "They were pioneers who taught us what doesn't work, so that those who came after could find what does." Nari joined him at the memorial. She now directed the interspecies traditional knowledge exchange, traveling between worlds to help different cultures share their ancestral wisdom. "Any regrets?" she asked. Ji-won looked around at the thriving colony, at children from a dozen worlds, playing together, at scientists and traditional knowledge keepers working side by side to understand their universe better. About nearly dying on a desert planet? No regrets at all. "The Academy wants us to take another impossible assignment," Nari said with a smile. "There's a world in the Theta system that's supposed to be uninhabitable because of toxic atmospheric conditions. 15 species have tried to establish colonies there and failed. Let me guess, they've only tried high-tech solutions? Atmospheric processors, environmental suits, sealed habitats, all the usual approaches.